Well, hello and welcome everyone. My name is Josh Wachtel. I'm the communications specialist for the IIRP. Um, and I'm very happy to have you here today for our webinar, Teaching Restorative in Times of COVID. We have a really wonderful lineup of guests. Claire de Mézerville from Costa Rica, who's involved with higher education in the IIRP, adult education primarily, and she also teaches teachers who teach students. We have St. Clair Adriaan from Queens, New York, who is principal at a middle school, highly restorative practices used by him and throughout that school. And Jen Hiestand from Bucks County, Pennsylvania. She teaches at Sellersville Buxmont Academy, which is the model program of the IIRP. Actually, that's the school where things all began in 1977 and eventually grew into a series of schools and that helped develop the ideas behind restorative practice. So welcome here today. This is a webinar maybe too long in the coming. About this time last year, we were asked to do a webinar like this. And to be honest, we felt like you all out there who were actually teaching in schools probably had more experience than we did. But with the passage of so much time, it felt like a nice time to take stock of what restorative looks like during these strange times that we're in right now. And hopefully moving through and moving past, but I know they're very much still here, especially in the world of children, where the pandemic may be with us a bit longer. So if you haven't done so yet, or if you want to do it again, please go into the chat. And I'll say this a number of times. The default is to only let the panelists know to chat to panelists, but please click that and make it all panelists and attendees and let us know where you're from, because some of the folks just joining seem to have just sent that to the panelists. So let us know where you're from. It's great to see folks from all around the world. As this is going to be heavy on question and answer. Today, we wanted to see what you were interested in hearing about. So in the Q&A, that's very separate than the chat, but in the Q&A, if you have a question, a specific question for the panelists, please use that Q&A as the webinar proceeds. And if you can keep the chatty stuff in the chat, that'll probably just help keep that all clear for everyone. We do have a poll we'd like to start out with, just to find out where everyone's what kind of settings you're working in. That would be helpful to us. What roles do you play in your educational setting? So if you can take just a minute and you can choose multiple. I know many people have multiple roles that they play. So let us know, and in about a minute, we'll take a look at that. So just in terms of the structure for the day, I've asked the three panelists to consider these three questions. What circumstances have you found yourself teaching in during the past year? How has restorative been a part of how you've navigated your teaching situations? And what have been your key learnings? And I've given them all of 3 minutes to introduce those questions. So I know that they will get to some of those points. They've sweated over this little talk for a few weeks. But I expect that these will be the kind of questions that get fleshed out throughout the rest of the discussion. So after those 3 or 4 minute introductions, we're gonna go to Q&A for the remainder of the webinar. Let's see. Ben, do you have a result on the polls? Let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay. Well, we have a lot of school counselors. That seems to have won the poll, and I'm glad we did get a school counselor on this call today. We got a lot of administrators, about almost a quarter, secondary education, consultants, great, and a smattering from other areas. Oh, and the other category, a high percentage of you are others. So if you want to let us know in the chat what those other things are, we'd be happy to see that. And remember, all panelists and attendees click that tab so we all get to see it when you type in. All right, well, it looks like it's 1:05, so I expect most people have joined by now. And at this point, I'd like to invite Claire de Mézerville López to turn on her video. Claire is, she is an employee of the IIRP. She, I'm sorry, I'm just double checking her title, which has changed. Claire, some reason, the Spanish speaking liaison? No, I don't have that right. Can you just?
Sure. Right now, my title is a community engagement specialist, but I think the main title that I can have right now is Claire, and I'll tell you a little
All
bit of
right.
what I do.
All right, Claire. Well, then in that case, why don't you just go ahead and please give your introduction. Claire's based in Costa Rica. She had been the liaison for IIRP Latin America. She does hold a Master of Science from the IIRP Graduate School in Restorative Practices, as well as other degrees. She's taught in higher education. She still does. She's been a lecturer, therapist, researcher, and consultant. So thanks for being with us, Claire.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you for having me. And it's good to be with all of you today. Let me begin giving you a little bit of the context about my work. I'm a lecturer at Universidad de Costa Rica. It's a large public university here in Costa Rica. I am Costa Rican. And I also work with restorative practices with teachers from many different public institutions across the country. So that's a little bit about what I do. I want to give you a little bit of context about the pandemic in my country. Costa Rica is in Central America. Schools shut down completely in March of 2020, and they shut down for the total of the school year. Our school year goes with the calendar year. It goes from February to November. So children and adolescents were completely locked down for the totality of the year. In February this year, they reopened in-person education, and they've done that until now. We are facing a very aggressive third wave, so we are on the verge of shutting down in-person education completely. Regarding university education, we went on fully virtual mode and we haven't gone back to in-person learning. So what has been my experience with my own students? I teach groups of 35 students, special educators, and they are going to become high school teachers as well. A balance between being structured and organized was helpful, but also about being warm. I will send my students a short video every Friday saying, hey, next week, what you need to do is this and this and this. And also, I hope you're well. I'm going crazy, but we're going to be fine. And just allowing myself to show that little bit of vulnerability, acknowledging that it's not about me and not to self-disclose in a way that is not appropriate, but just to let that happen. And then when we would be on online learning, synchronous online learning, to say, well, before the class, let's do a circle. How are you coping? How are you dealing with things? And that was significant. Um, Virtual learning has enlarged the gaps that previously existed between public and private education. And this is something, this is a concern that we're going to be dragging this enlargement of these social gaps for decades, even after the pandemic is over. I work with the teachers that teach the youth that is in confined facilities. They are in prison, and teachers were taken away completely from the facilities. They were supposed to do virtual learning, but there's only one computer. They were supposed to do distance learning, but it was not working. They organized so they could send their students cookies or candy or cards to tell them, we haven't forgotten you, we still remember you. But the thing is that it's a population that got very much forgotten. So those gaps are just growing larger and larger and larger. Going back to in-person education, my experience has been with teachers that working with adolescents regarding protocols has been much harder than with children. And I get that. These are adolescents that were confined for a year. They want to hang out with their friends. They don't want to social distance with their boyfriend or their girlfriend. But they are having teachers that are exhausted of telling them in recess, please social distance, please put on your mask. And teachers are just drained. So a restorative perspective has helped me. Frida Rundell's relational care ladder that she will explain far better than I could when she talks about the human needs that we have and what can we provide as teachers. We need safety, we can provide a structure. We need awareness about what's going outside and inside of us, we can provide nurturing. We need to express our thoughts and feelings, we need to be engaged, we need to be empowered about those little things that we can control, and we need to be challenged. We can offer that, even wearing a mask, socially distancing. We can do that online. It's harder, but we can do that. But as teachers, we need that too. So just to wrap it up, my key learnings is that as teachers, we need to offer that, but we need to get that for ourselves. We need to self-care. We need to figure out ways to do this in sustainable, humane ways. And self-care is not individual. It has to do with community compromises. And we need to engage intergenerational leadership. We need to engage the kids because we never needed community as much as now. So I'm going to wrap it up there, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. Self-care, I'm curious how that topic comes up today. I definitely can relate to the challenges of child rearing during this time, if not teaching. So next I would like to invite St. Clair. Adriaan, you can turn on your video, St. Clair. St. Clair was born, raised, and educated in South Africa during apartheid. He learned that education was his only weapon against the apartheid. I met him a few years ago at a conference, IIRP World Conference in Bethlehem. He was talking about his work at that time in Los Angeles with very diverse communities. And he has since moved to Queens, New York, where he is principal at charter school, charter school of the city, if I'm not mistaken. So St. Clair, I understand you've been virtual learning for the last year at the charter school there. So please unmute and tell us all about your work over the last year during this time.
Yeah, well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you are. So I am in Queens, New York, and my school's name is Academy of the City Charter School. We're about 1.5 miles to 2 miles away from the Alamist Hospital, which was the epicenter at the beginning of the whole first wave in New York itself, which meant it affected our community at large a great deal, as we have most of our kids living in the area and parents working over there. We have been remote since March 19th of last year. We have not gone back to in-person learning, and we have decided to stay remote until the start of the next school year. And it gives us enough time to prep and get ready and make sure that everything is safe for both students, staff, and everyone involved in the daily running of the school, in being within the building. So being the leader of the school involves making sure that the needs of everyone or every stakeholder in the ecosystem is being addressed. So we have the kids, we have the teachers, we have the families. So the first question that we needed to ask when we moved to the remote was, or that I had to address, was informing staff that our approach needed to be transformative versus oppressive, because we have kids with different needs. We also have staff with different needs, staff that has kids at home that are on remote learning while they have to make sure, so having to take all those things into account. The biggest thing that I was happy that the staff agreed upon because we are a community. There's a South African term that I've been able to help our community over here embrace, which is Ubuntu, which says I am who I am because of you. So we all realize that during this time, Maslow trumps Bloom in every aspect, and that the importance of the social, emotional, and mental well-being of our kids was more important than test scores or anything else that is a part of our usual school day. Fortunately, with having a budget, I was also able to appoint this year a social worker, and as well as a restorative dean. And with our counselor, they make up an amazing student well-being team. They meet with teachers. They have social and emotional check-ins for both teachers and our students. We have just gone all the way in ensuring under that concept or philosophy of Ubuntu that our students have everything they need, from providing them with all the technology, electronics, to paying for their internet, paying for utilities, making sure that we deliver grocery parcels, go to Costco and everything. As I said, we know and we knew that Maslow during this time was greater than Bloom. And so when it also came to teaching and grading, what are we going to do? Is this still going to be about compliance? If you're a day late, you get 10% less. And if it's 3 days late, it doesn't get graded at all. Or is it about mastery and understanding, which means that, yeah, we will take it the next week because everyone was going through some form of hardship. So with that being said, everything and every decision that I as a school leader had to make, and that our faculty, amazing faculty and staff at the Academy University had to embrace, was based on restorative practices, starting with the social discipline window, because everything was done with the staff. The second big restorative practices philosophy, or part of the philosophy that came in, was fair practice, making sure that everything was based on getting on equality and equal treatment, and having every kid get a fair chance. But one of the biggest things that with restorative practices and what was happening was also the compass of shame, because we were forcing our way into people's homes, into kids' homes. We have a diverse population, socially, economically, and everything else. And everyone was vulnerable in letting everyone and all the other kids into their homes. So those are a bunch of things that we needed to consider. So everything I said was based on the restorative practices. And what I have learned through all this is that when a community comes together, you can do amazing things. And it started from our board of directors all the way down to our teachers, our students, and everyone, knowing that everyone was going through hardship, and knowing that it was necessary to be adaptable. It was necessary to be flexible, but more than anything else, it was necessary to show empathy, because many of us went through many different things during this time, and it was important that we felt love from each other and that kindness was being shown. So I wholeheartedly, without a doubt, says that restorative practice played a great role in getting our school and our school community through this epidemic, to ensure that effective teaching and learning was still taking place. Thank you.
Thank you, Sinclair. Thank you very much. And we're going to be hearing from all the panelists later when we'll break into a question and answer. But at this point, I would like to invite our third panelist and final panelist, Jen Hiestand, onto the screen. Jen is a school counselor at Buxmont Academy, which is very close to my heart. It's a model program of the IIRP, but in fact, it was the first program before there was an IIRP. My parents are Susan and Ted Wachtel, who founded CSF Buxmont and then IIRP Graduate School. And the Sellersville School is a place I used to spend a lot of time. And Jen is teaching there, a school counselor there. She's played a number of roles in the CSF and Buxmont organizations over the years. And she's going to tell you about the year that they had down there in Sellersville, Pennsylvania. Thanks, Jen.
Oh, thank you so much. I am so humbled and honored to be a part of this. So thank you so much. When I first think about, okay, what kind of circumstances did we find ourselves in? Similar to a lot of other stories, you know, I'd like to say the simple response is that we went virtual and then face-to-face, and then sometimes both. and then flip-flop and change around. And so I think the best way to describe how we found ourselves was that it's like a roller coaster. And I kindly call it the Corona coaster. You know, you never knew quite what was coming. There's uphills, there's downhills, there's twists and turns all over. Sometimes you could kind of prepare for it, sometimes not. But you're trying to teach and to reach your students and work as a team all on a roller coaster with all this happening. So you can imagine all those emotions, and you're trying to manage your own emotions, build relationships, navigate technology, being flexible, maximizing the positives while minimizing the negatives. And there were a lot of negatives, and making sure that no one falls off. And so that's what it really kind of seemed like during this whole thing. And so the one thing was that it may not look pretty, and it may not be perfect, but we were in it together. So when you ask the question about how has restorative practices been a part of this, oh my gosh, it's been everything. It's the framework of this roller coaster, this Corona coaster that we're on, not just with the students, but again, with our team. When we first shut down, I'm here in Pennsylvania, in Sellersville, and so we were shut down by the state. First, there were some concerns with the county, but our first shutdown happened and our pivot to virtual was in March of 2020. And I remember thinking, oh, this is only going to be 2 weeks. So, you know, nobody really knew what the future looked like and what we were going to do, but we did know restorative practices. And so that's what we did. So we called the whole school together, and we sat in a circle and we presented transparency, information, our expectation clarity of this is what our expectations are, what our plan is. And then we asked questions like, what do you need? And what do you need to do? And again, everybody's in this together. And I look back and I'm amazed and a little bit embarrassed too at how we presented that, you know, the little tiny framework. Okay, so this is what your plan's going to look like for the day. Because we were thinking, again, it was only going to last a short period of time. But everybody in that circle, nobody panicked. We allowed voices to be heard. We allowed them to share their feelings. And they got into that problem-solving mode right away. We had built this culture of trust. And so no matter what was going to happen and what it was going to look like, they knew that they could trust that we were going to do it with restorative practices and do it with them. We were going to continue to build relationships. We were going to maintain them. We were going to keep our high expectations, high support, and we were going to continue to do what we do best. So in the beginning, we continued to meet as a staff daily, and we would ask questions like, again, what do you need? What do you need to do? How are you? How do we what are we doing well? What do we need to do better? And then we started to ask questions of the students and their families. What are we doing well? What do we need to do better? And so as we've grown and we've continued to pivot to virtual and face-to-face and a combination of both, and currently we have some virtual students and we have some face-to-face students. And again, they switch intermittently based upon their different family circumstances. No matter what, we continue with what are we doing well and what do we need to do better? And that feedback loop has really allowed us to get smarter and to grow and to do better. And so I think when you talk about what are the key learning pieces, just how important restorative practices is. I know that sounds so cliche or corny, but I can't say that's the bottom line. It can be done anywhere. We figured how we can do this virtually. We're going to do what we know, what we do best, and we're just going to pivot and do it in this virtual world. In any circumstance, we can be restorative. And the reason being is because it's not a manual, it's a process. And as long as we're doing it together with one another, we will continue to grow. Now more than ever in this severely disconnected world, you never know what lies beyond that screen. So you're popping up with different circumstances of like family dynamics, poverty, neglect, abuse, living arrangements, anybody's worst nightmare. And you don't know what's lying behind on that screen. So that's where it was so important to be mindful of others and where they were coming from. And like Sinclair had mentioned before, being aware of not just the students and the family shame that they were experiencing, but your own shame. Because by definition, in Don Nathanson's shame and affect theory, everybody was experiencing shame and had their own shame experience because there was an interruption of a positive. So being aware of that and being mindful was really important, and allowing people to share their stories. I think another really important learning was just how powerful the collective brain could be. I definitely don't have all the answers, or maybe even one of the answers, but I felt relieved in knowing that I didn't have to be the only one, that every day we're coming together again saying what worked, what didn't work, what do we need to do, how do we move forward, having those circles, having those small impromptu conferences, and asking people for guidance, for feedback, that powerful feedback loop, again, not just from our coworkers, but from families and from students, really allowed us to grow and to move. And there's a lot of things that, you know, I will take with me for, you know, some of this technology stuff, obviously, like Zooming and Teams and things like that, but also things like how you communicate with talking points, and, you know, how, wow, I can reach, you know, some of my Hispanic students and my Vietnamese students by using this talking points app, it automatically translates. So learning some of that stuff. And then lastly, I think a big piece was learning that, you know, again, talking about the social discipline window, that how important it was to keep our expectations. So when we presented, this is what our school day looks like, and this is what our plan is, it was always at the top, while also understanding that the students have different circumstances. And so we never lowered our expectations to meet the students, but instead said, okay, so here's our expectations. And we understand that this is where you may be right now. How do we help you move one step further, and then another step and another step? So never is to lower expectations, but to help them grow and reach the expectations so that we could continue to help them thrive academically, and our program itself could also thrive academically.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you so much. Can I invite the other panelists, Sinclair and Claire, to turn on your videos? We're gonna go into a discussion format. And I just want to say at this point, a lot of the panelists are mentioning key restorative concepts that some people are probably familiar with and some may not be. IIRP does offer an online professional development event called Restorative Practices for educators, and that would explain a lot of the concepts that are being discussed in a lot more detail. But we're going to do our best to answer some of the questions that came in and share some of our perceptions. I've been reviewing the questions. I noticed Claire was typing some answers. Thank you, Claire. But there's a number of questions about circles that come up. You know, how do you do that virtually, or you know, and you know, I thought maybe you could share some tips or even some interesting circles that you've been involved with some anecdotes that might help people get some different ideas. And I just unmute and jump right in.
Yeah, how do you do a circle when you really look like Hollywood squares, right? So I think you kind of practiced, and it was this weird thing, you know, inviting everybody to come on to the platform we used was Zoom, but I know there's so many other platforms, but virtually, how do you join on? And so you learned how to, okay, so you're not sitting in a circle, but some of the same important concepts were there, that faces need to be seen, and voices were able to be heard. Now with that, there's always so many, you know, cats walking through the window, or I know that we had a student that we had to have a conversation with grandmom because the student needed to have, you know, his own time to be on the video. And so setting those boundaries and teaching them, how do you problem solve different, and there's so many different things that pop up, right? And so you never know what you're going to experience until you're in it, but just simple things, right? Like, how do you figure it out? And so we tried it and said, oh my gosh, we learned that you could just do things like saying, okay, so tell the person when you're done talking, tell who you're going to go to next and say their name, you know? And so it seems like, wow, how do you do this? But you just try simple things like that. Like, okay, all right, now Claire, it's your turn. You're going to go next. And then they tried and it works. And then somebody else comes up with another great idea, and you try that too. And so it's trial by error. And when it doesn't work, you don't do it again. And when it does work, you just capitalize on it and keep going.
I think it also depends on the age. Some things that we can do. I think being in little squares it is weird. It doesn't feel like a circle, but just to be very explicit, what we mean by a circle is that we're all going to get a chance to be engaged and to participate. Because normally those of us that really like to talk are going to talk more and more and more and more. And those that don't like to talk as much are going to talk less and less. And we're going to break that. So with groups of students that have not been as used to doing circles, I've begun using the participant list and I call them by their name. As they get used, we try different things like that you said, Jen, tell the person that goes next to you. With children, and perhaps with teens that are getting used to circles, just do circles that are fun, that are light. Do a circle about something that makes you feel good and that is short, that feels easy, doesn't feel too heavy. And then you can move on to see how the group is going, how the group is feeling. On working with teachers, I didn't start with fun. I started more with being aware. Let's have a circle because we need to talk about how we're dealing with all of this. And just being honest about that and being able to participate, being able to acknowledge the grief that we're not having all of the bodies in the room, the body in the room that is significant for education, but we're having a lot of rooms in the same place. And behind that little tiny square where you only see me from here to here, there is a whole person with a whole story, with a whole lot of things that are going on. But to get to that point, with kids, you need to build trust. With grown-ups, I think we're very much aware that we need support and that this is hard. So we have gone more quickly to doing more serious circles.
Somebody in the chat said they had everybody number themselves in their name. Sinclair, did you have anything to add on that?
The only thing that I can add is that we have a circle with staff. I have a circle with staff every Friday. We call it Morning Indaba. Indaba is another African word just meaning the gathering of the elders. And we have learned so much more about each other during this COVID period and deeper into family backgrounds and everyone vulnerable, but those circles have really brought us together. I sent out the prompt this morning, for example, for tomorrow, so people can bring something or know exactly what they're going to share. But I just wanted to say that these circles in this time of COVID has brought us together more than ever before.
Yeah, I know in my background as a teacher, I often felt that when you get the human connection, the learning comes along, but the relationships are just so important. There was a question here, I don't know how you guys want to answer it, but I think it's super interesting. Somebody asked, how do we move from gaining understanding about problems and needs in circles, for example, to moving to the problem solving and strategizing phase? So I'm just curious what thoughts you have about that. Yeah, go ahead, Claire.
To me, I think that would be a fantastic question to bring to the circle. I would ask the group, like, I would really like for us to talk about this, but at the same time, how do we move from exactly like you said it? I cannot phrase it better and see what the circle gives back.
So reflect back that we've been talking about your problems and needs. How can we move to the next section and then just have them go around again? All right. Sinclair?
Right.
We always,
So there's the proactive circles, which we use to warn and caution and everything else, and then of course there's a restorative circle where you do solve the problem, and that is where you hand out the prompt. I had an instance where a 6th grade math class just didn't like the introduction or the do now that the teacher did every day. They found it to be inappropriate, not testing them, not being part of math, and went to the teacher, said, hey, do you mind a restorative circle with the kids to solve this problem? The kids are not happy. Oh yeah, we had this circle. The teacher explained how this is forms part of what was done yesterday. and why she's doing it. And they told her why they didn't like it. And they figured out, okay, let's find a compromise. We'll be less noisy when we come in. So you don't have to make us sit down and immediately start. But then there was a solution, and it just went better. So the prompt with the given norms helps find solutions to, and particularly in middle school.
I was just always, my follow-up question is always, okay, so what would that look like? And what would the evidence be that this is working and that there's a problem? Putting it to that action then. So there's all these great ideas, great, perfect, but then let's put it into some action. Who's going to do what? What would that look like? And then can we come back to it? When would be a good time to come back and reevaluate?
There's a question here that I know the IIRP has been looking at a bit this year. How did you address racial discrimination and civil unrest? Did that come up in your settings? I see you nodding, Jen. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and it's always so tough, right? And everybody kind of holds their breath a little bit. So we didn't purposely bring anything up, but if a student had a concern and brought it up, we have, okay, so when would be an appropriate time to talk about it? How would you like to talk about it? And so some of the areas where so it might not be appropriate to talk about it in math class, but could it be appropriate to talk about with your counselor one-on-one? Is it something that you'd like to discuss with other students? And so we actually, into our school, we have, it's actually an elective class, and where it's a group values, group dynamics and values clarification. And so they could have those open discussions with, about their thoughts, about their feelings, and again, this is like Claire had mentioned earlier, this isn't something you just jump into right away, but they've had that trust, they have that understanding, they've done some of they have those relationships built, so they can talk about some of those tougher situations. But yeah, absolutely, if somebody's bringing it up, then you definitely want to allow them that opportunity to talk about it.
Right. So we have advisory. So everything was addressed in advisory with students. But we also at our school have a very strong social justice action committee that preps and plans everything. So we also have regular discussions with regard to diversity and equity with staff. We actually have an outside consultant that has been employed to work with us throughout the year. We've also arranged these discussions and open forums with parents, so involving the whole school community. With the uprisings, we dealt with the Asian hate crimes and everything as a school community. So it allowed voice. Nothing was pushed. It was done subtly. It was compassionate listening, discussions, and everything else just fell into place. It took a while for everyone to, we're still not there 100%, for people just to express true feelings. There's still but we are making progress in the direction of being able to have open discussions about race, about inequity, about diversity, about social justice. And it's just improving relationships throughout the school as we move along.
Claire, I see a somewhat related question, not exactly, but a question about addressing gender-based violence. So I don't know if that's something you've dealt more with in your neck of the woods.
Yes, and I was going to mention that because I am in Costa Rica, the way that I have experienced all the civil unrest that is going on around the world is always different in the context of where you are. And my context is a little bit different. But we have had difficult conversations and circles talking about things that are going on, in my experience, more related with gender violence. So I think the challenge that we have to be compassionate and to explore and to be responsible is, how do we bring in conversations where people can share their experience honestly, where people are allowed to make accountable institutions and structures, and at the same time where we can talk about interdependence and co-responsibility. And it is a very tricky balance. So I think there's no one person discipline facilitator leader that has figured it out by themselves. I think per community, we really need to figure out together what do we want out of this conversation, or where do we want to go from now. I feel that we still have a long way to go, but that shouldn't stop us from continue to move. And my cat's here.
As a lover of public libraries, I can't resist asking this question from a librarian who's on the call and asks, she's been hearing about the struggles in schools for a while. How can we in the public library assist schools, teachers, students in this difficult time? Any suggestions for the libraries?
What does the library have available ebooks for people who are afraid to get out or get into indoor spaces that students can have access to, or that a teacher can get class sets of, for example? That would be helpful.
So I have several ideas for this friend. So let me just get started. I am not going to talk as a teacher. I'm going to talk more as a working single mom. I am very, very, very concerned about the amount of screen time of my children. So any help that you can give us to encourage our kids to read, that will be very much appreciated. And what I loved about the question when I saw it in the chat is that you care. And I think as teachers, we really need to be validated and feel seen. And I think that can translate in many different kinds of support. I don't know if you in your community what support looks like, but I think there are many different ways that it can play out. One of them could be, well, could libraries be the places for support for circles for teachers that are doing circles for their students? But I don't know.
Great suggestions. At this time, I'd just like to say a word about the IIRP Graduate School. We are a graduate school. We offer a Master's of Science in Restorative Practices and a graduate certificate. We also do a lot of professional development. There are many offerings you can choose from, which you can find on our website. And there's also tons of resources, IIRP News, presidential papers, and other resources that you can find on the website. So if you're looking to learn more about restorative practices, we hope you will take some opportunities to do that. And it's great to have you here today. All right, let's see. What question has not been asked? Social worker. So I know we did have a lot of social workers on the call. So she's asking, using restorative practices with my school, it's been amazing. Wondering if she studied restorative practice, should become certified in restorative justice. And I think there was another social worker who was just asking a more general question about how restorative can support social workers in their work. So I don't know, maybe you're the school counselor, Jen, so why don't you take that one first?
Oh my goodness. Well, again, you're asking questions, seeking knowledge, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. So it's hard, right? Because I just want to invite everybody into my building. Like, I'm like, oh yeah, librarian, come on in. Oh, anybody, come on in and observe. And so it's really hard with COVID and the protocols to just invite everybody in. So we can invite you virtually, right? And so reaching out to different places and to see what can we do. I think just having the conversations, that's so important, and asking questions, that's a start. And then you start to get the brain, the group brain growing and brainstorming different ideas. So absolutely, if you would like to continue to learn more about it, the IIRP is a wealth of wonderful knowledge. It's not even just the tools that you learn, it really is the bag that holds all the tools. It just makes sense. It's like, you know, when you try to do a puzzle and there's all these little different pieces, it's seeing what the final product is going to look like. That's what restorative practices really means to me. And within it, there's so many different facets and so many different things that just make sense.
Any other suggestions for, I was thinking, Sinclair, about your the restorative coach, no, a dean.
Yeah.
And I'm just, what did that role look like? I mean, who was he connecting with, and what did that, or she, I didn't even know.
It's she, and I actually think she is on this webinar right now. So Sandy Rose, if you hear, hi. She works with everybody. So she's part of the wellness team. For example, this morning, she went into every advisory to just remind kids that we have a program that we can see all and everything they do online, right? So so that when we come in, or when we call them in because of a website that they visited that they shouldn't, or a bad Google chat, they are not caught off guard. So in terms of being restorative, we're letting you know, and this is how it's going to go forward. So she works with all the teachers. She deals with issues that comes up restoratively, and a lot of middle school girls losing friends and stuff. And recently, she also works with families if there's something happened between two kids. So the role is that of fixing the harm, bringing together, restoring, and our main thing is the mindset change from punishment and harsh consequences to discipline with dignity that promotes change in behavior and just not lead to compliance.
Yeah, and sorry.
Go ahead.
Similarly, we don't have a restorative dean, but we do have a restorative coach. And we were chatting beforehand too about how really her role was so important during this time, because not only were we onboarding new students into our program during shutdown and doing things virtually, but we also had new staff as well. And so that role became so important, where she could join in with classes virtually and afterwards talk about what went well, what would you do different, and put labels on things. Because one of the things is being really explicit about what is it that we do. So you have this feeling and you try it, but then once you can put a label onto it, then you can duplicate it over and over and share those stories. And everybody says, oh my goodness, I understand what it is that you're talking about. There's a common language. And so that's where, we called it a restorative coach, played such an important role in really expanding the knowledge about what is it that we're doing. Let's do it on purpose, on time, and let's learn from one another with everything. And so that was a huge part during this pandemic for us.
Yes, and I think there are also levels. I think restorative practices as a framework is very much meant for community, is very much meant for being something that we can teach everyone, hopefully to engage children and adolescents into facilitating restorative practices and processes. Now, there are some situations where we are dealing with a restorative process for something that is quite serious or complex. I am remembering the UN document of restorative justice programs that had a second edition that came out just last year, and how they said, well, for those kind of conversations, we really need to be very well prepared. So I think we need to find those agreements on levels on how we all should be able to address things that are going on, but also to know who are the supports that are needed when situations get especially complicated. I saw a couple of comments in chat about situations that were very severe, critical, and traumatic. It is not fair for teachers, for students, for the therapy profession to try to improvise very complex interventions. However, I think all of us need to learn some psychological first aids, because we're dealing with a lot of pain. We're dealing with a lot of grief. We're dealing with crisis constantly, and we all need to have the basics. I think restorative practices are a fantastic way to start. And just to bring that community part of it and not making it seem so distant or specialized.
We had a question about how many people were on the webinar today. We have currently it's at 264. I think we were at about 285 at one point. So thanks for all of you joining us from all around the world. It's a great conversation. The next question, this always comes up about implementation. This is about, you know, how do you bring this framework or a whole new school to a whole new school that has not been practicing restorative practices. But I think implementation comes up in all kinds of ways. How do you get started? I don't know how that applies to the COVID environment exactly, but maybe that plays into it as well. Somebody want to take that? Sinclair?
Yeah, it's a challenge because you are met with a lot of excitement from some. You have the doubters, and then in layman's terms, the old guard like, nope, this is not good. Kids can just letting kids get away with whatever. Like one teacher said, "Oh, what's Sinclair gonna do? You take him to the office, he gives them a lollipop and talks to them." And the same person at the end said at the end of the year, "Wow, by just watching you," and I just responded to someone in the chat room, by just watching you, I've been able to get the same responses and the same respect that you get from the kids. And it was all just in the way, the affective language, the way you address, the way you listen, instead of, you know, being harsh and everything else. My go-to converter is the West Philadelphia High School video. And that video where you have teachers, parents, students, and administrators talking about what was and how restorative has changed. So that's the testimony before everyone, to plant the seed and then take it from there. But it must also not be forced. You need people to get used to the idea, and baby steps.
Something that has been significant in my own context was starting COVID. We started doing webinars every month. You can find them all in our YouTube channel, and they're all in Spanish. But we were amazed by the generosity, because it was about identifying the leadership that already exists, people that are doing this restorative thing and that are figuring out as they go. We are all figuring this out as we go. And NGOs, schools, school principals, institutions, they were just so magnificently generous. We had this webinar with the principal from a school in Dominican Republic about how they were dealing with parents restoratively that are just going through so many emotions and situations throughout the pandemic. And we had a lot of people connecting with them. So share, connect, network, articulate. We are very much a community of communities, and we can really enrich one another. So that has been important, because that has also given us things to give to someone that is just getting here and saying, this restorative thing might be useful for me. How do I start? Well, I have a lot of videos that I can share with you. I have very quick things that you can take a look, and then you tell me, where you want to go from here.
Jen, do you have a comment?
Just try. I think the fact that there's a desire, how do I do this? What is it going to look like? Just try something. Try, as simple as an affective statement one day. Try pulling two kids together and having a conversation, and get your somebody that you trust. Hey, let's try this thing. Let's make it a challenge. And see how it goes. And it might feel weird or awkward and silly, and that's okay. And you might fail, and that's even better, because you're going to learn so much from it too. But just try something, right? And so it's just one step at a time, and build upon it and grow and grow and grow. But that excitement, that willingness to learn, you can't buy that anywhere. So you got to capitalize on that.
I want to share it. That reminds me of the first restorative conference I ran, which was a mock restorative conference. It was 1996 or 97. And I had just, my mom mailed me Terry O'Connell's Real Justice script, conferencing script, this conference script that we teach in restorative justice conferencing. And I was in the Peace Corps in Romania, and I was teaching English, and I was in a middle school, and those kids didn't know that much English. But I took the script and I said, there's this way of dealing with conflict. Do you have any problems? And they started, it was hysterical. It was a group of about 10 kids, and they're like, this thing happened and this kid did something to the teacher. I couldn't even understand all of what they were talking about, but somebody played that kid, and they like, somebody was the mom, and they were the other kids in the class, and they just imagined what a restored conference would be, and it was so much fun. I wonder if they remember it as well as I do. Well, let's see. We're coming down here. I saw there was one other. Oh, I love this question. How do you handle someone leaving a circle, especially if it appears to have been due to some frustration? Jen, I'm gonna give that to you.
Oh my goodness, that happens all the time. So people don't always respond to their emotions the right way. And we always tell everybody that any emotion you have is absolutely okay. You can feel however you feel, but let's talk about how you respond to it. And so naturally, some people make poor choices. And so when they choose to leave, I think it's always having a point person to go and talk to them afterwards. So if it's a virtual thing and they just log off, then we have a point person, usually it's me, that I'm either using the Talking Points app and texting them, or calling them using Google phone call, or setting up another Zoom meeting to say, what happened? Okay, what were you thinking? What have you thought about since? And just trying to ask those restorative questions and problem solve to be able to come back and do it. Because I don't know, there could be so many different things, and I don't want to pass any judgment or assumption. From my perspective, it might just look like, oh, they didn't like what I had to say, so they hightailed out of there. It could be maybe the Wi-Fi bill wasn't being paid, and so their Wi-Fi just got shut off. Or it could have been, oh my gosh, something, there was a big loud crash and they had to go tend to their siblings. Their cat walked across and turned it off. Who knows? But so asking those questions, following up with them. So what happened? Can you tell me what happened? What was really going on? And then from there, taking it forward and encouraging them to do the right thing to come back and repair that harm.
There's so many great questions. There's so many great conversations happening in the chat. I'm going to try to squeeze in one or two more before the 2 o'clock hour. Somebody asked about any tips for little kids and circles, or kids that don't want to sit in circles. Any thoughts? Claire, can I toss that to you?
Yes, you can. So I'm trying to figure this out every single day. Restorative practices are about relationships. Begin with the one-on-one. Sometimes a kid might not be comfortable in a circle or in a group situation, and it doesn't mean that the kid has ill intentions or that. Begin with the one-on-one. Figure out what's going on with the kid. Begin with the positive affect. Begin with connecting with the child. In a way that the kid feels safe, you're more likely to get to know what's going on behind the kid not liking circles. My own experience with my own son, with my youngest son, was that he didn't like virtual classes at all. He wouldn't participate in the circle. He wouldn't make eye contact with the teacher. He would just get distracted. And it's because he hates virtual learning. He misses going to school. He misses his friends. But on one with his teacher, he would really connect and he will become re-engaged. If we think that restorative is only circles, we're going to miss out, because it's not. There are many different ways that could work. And for small children, there might be a lot of flexibility and variation that we are going to need to put in place.
Thoughts on that, or last word, St. Clair and Jen? We got about a minute left.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing all your stories with me. I learned so much from today, so thank you.
Thanks, Jen. St. Clair.
Me as well. Thank you. I did put my email in the chat. If anyone has follow-up questions, I don't have all the answers, but I'm sure I can find some in the network and stuff like that. But restorative justice and practices, ladies and gentlemen, did not only change my professional life, but also my personal life, how I interact with people, how I react to my anger, and many other things. Made me a better leader, a better friend, a better brother, and just a better person in all, besides being able to be more of a role model for the staff and students at school. So
Thank
It's a
you.
great thing.
Thank you, Sinclair. Claire.
Hi, so I have a visitor here. I just want to acknowledge that for people that might watch this recording later, you have no idea how fantastic the chat has been. People have been sharing resources, experiences, and I just want to acknowledge all of you. For people that look at this later, this was a great community experience. So thank you so much for having us. And let's talk about caring for each other, and let's talk about self-caring.
Amen.
We cannot give from empty. So that I think that we need to work on that. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for participating. We will have a follow-up with a recording and some other information, and we'll post the recording soon. We hope to see you again. We'll be having another webinar next month. Thanks, Claire, St. Clair, and Jen joining me, and Ben Wachtel on the back end running tech. Thanks so much. Take care.
See you in the next one.